Take those pines down to shoulder height. The buyers want an open lake view from every deck.
Delia Crosby Worthington set it to a tree crew at 7:30 in the morning at the shore end of the gravel road that had served my family's camp on Kennebec Lake for 118 years. Her husband Whitfield, the developer of Loon Cove Lakefront Estates, was filming for the sales brochure. Her crew's climbers went up the first pine. A 152-year-old eastern white pine my great-grandfather had nailed a no trespassing sign to in 1923, and began topping it with chainsaws. By sundown, they had taken 11 more. My 19-year-old nephew Torin, visiting from Orono, was the one who counted the stumps. Delia thought she was improving the view for her 14 buyers, whose closings were scheduled in 6 weeks. She didn't know the gravel road her buyers would drive in on, the wellhead every cabin drank from, and the septic drain field every toilet flushed into, all sat on easements I had never signed. What would you have done? Where are you watching tonight? My name is Thatcher Rowland. I am 58 years old. I live at Rowland's Point on Kennebec Lake in Franklin County, Maine, and for 29 years I practiced real estate and mergers and acquisitions law at a firm in Portland before retiring in 2022. My professional specialty was real estate transaction due diligence, which is to say, I spent 3 decades reading closing binders, title insurance policies, escrow agreements, and easement filings. I know what can go wrong at closing day better than most attorneys in the state of Maine. My great-grandfather Isaiah Rowland bought 340 acres on the southeastern shore of Kennebec Lake in 1906 from a logging operation retreating further north. He built a 3-room clapboard camp on a piece of ledge above the boat landing and hung a hand-lettered sign at the main road that read, Rowland's Point, Eastern 1906. My grandfather, my father, and I each added 2 rooms in turn. The sign, in the same family lettering, has been replaced 4 times over the generations and still says 1906. My wife Rosalind died 3 Augusts ago of ALS after a fight that started as a tremor in her left hand during Christmas of 2021. She was a high school English teacher in Farmington, a Bowdoin graduate, and the person who taught me what patience really is. We were married 32 years. I watched her leave in the 4-poster bed where my grandfather had been born 91 years earlier. I have 2 daughters. Clementine is 32, a 5th grade teacher in Bangor, and the mother of my only grandson Ames, who is 4. Meredith is 28, a nurse practitioner in Lewiston, and I have my brother Wendell's son Torin, who is 19, a sophomore at the University of Maine Orono, studying forest ecology. Wendell died of colon cancer 8 years ago. Torin's mother had already been gone. I raised him alongside my daughters. He is a quiet kid with a good laugh and an unusual ability to identify trees from 60 feet away in any light. Across the southern boundary of Rowland's Point sits a development called Loon Cove Lakefront Estates. 14 3,000-square-foot lakefront cabins, marketed between $850,000 and $1.2 million each. Total projected sales, $14.1 million. All 14 cabins are scheduled to close between June 15th and July 10th of this year. Every single one of those 14 cabins gets its drinking water, its wastewater disposal, and its road access from easements that cross my property. Not one of those easements has ever been signed by me. The developer is a Boston finance man named Whitfield Crosby Worthington, operating through a Delaware LLC. His wife Delia is Loon Cove's HOA president. 5 years ago, when Whitfield's LLC was getting the subdivision approved, he came to my porch with a thin folder of contemplated easement agreements. Rosalind had just been diagnosed. I told him I would consider the easements after I had capacity. His LLC filed the contemplated easements with the county and proceeded to build on the assumption that I would sign eventually. They started cabin framing 6 weeks after my wife's diagnosis. They finished the last cabin 6 weeks before her funeral. I could not stop them during construction. Rosalind needed all of me. After Rosalind died, I spent 11 months in the kind of grief that leaves you staring at a kitchen floor you used to love. When I came back to myself, the Loon Cove cabins were built. The driveway across my land was paved. The shared wellhead was pumping. The shared drain field was absorbing. My great-grandfather's no trespassing sign from 1923 was gone. I made one phone call. It was to Ebenezer Pike, my mentor, a 74-year-old real estate attorney in Farmington. He listened. He said, "Thatcher, you are holding what in our profession we call the closing day gun. And a closing day gun only fires once. Ebenezer was 74, wore bow ties in court, and had been my mentor since I clerked for him in 1991. I drove down the morning after our first phone call. Thatcher, walk me through it. I did. The 2021 contemplated easement filings, the construction during my wife's illness, the completion during my grief, the Loon Cove sign at the head of the gravel road, the wellhead, the drain field, the paved driveway, the no trespassing sign from 1923 that had vanished. Ebenezer did not take a single note. When I finished, he said, "Son, what does your closing calendar look like for Loon Cove?" All 14 cabins close between June 15th and July 10th. Delia Crosby Worthington has been running open houses for 9 months. The first 7 deposits are already in escrow. 3 title companies are issuing policies. 3 or 4? 4, if you count the Boston Buyers Massachusetts carrier. And what do you intend to do? I thought about it. I thought about Rosalind. I thought about my great-grandfather's pine. I thought about Torrin, who had walked the stumps 2 weeks earlier and had come home and said, quietly, at the kitchen table, that a 152-year-old eastern white pine was not something you grow back in your lifetime. Ebenezer, I don't want to destroy the project. I want the easements properly granted, at fair market compensation, with permanent protections for my land. I want them to write a real check. I want them to acknowledge what they did. I want a conservation easement filed on the remainder of Roland's Point so this never happens again. And I want those 14 cabins to exist, occupied, lived in, for families who did nothing wrong. He nodded once, slowly. All right, that means you do nothing right now, and you do everything in June. Tell me how nothing looks. Nothing looks like you do not confront Delia. You do not engage with Whitfield. You do not respond to any demands they send. You certainly do not sign anything. You quietly prepare your title objection file, your wellhead test results, your drain field analysis, your easement filing rebuttals, your chain of title documentation, and, this is the one nobody expects, you build relationships with every title company underwriter in the Northeast that might insure these deals. You wait until the week of the first closing, and you serve each of those underwriters with a written notice that no easements exist in favor of the HOA on your property, with documentary proof. How many underwriters are we talking about? 4 carriers on the 14 properties, possibly 5. We'll know in April, and when they get my notice, their general counsels will kill every deal in the office that same afternoon. No underwriter in the state of Maine insures a lakefront property without a clean easement title. The closings will collapse. The buyers will refuse to fund. The lenders will refuse to release. The HOA and Kennebec Heritage Development Partners will be left with 14 uninhabitable structures, 14 unhappy buyers, 14 deposit returns, and an approximately $2 million lender interest exposure. And then they come to you on the 3rd day of June, and you hand them the 4 things you just listed: fair easement compensation, real acknowledgement, conservation easement on the remainder, occupancy for the 14 families who did nothing wrong. I looked at my mentor across his oak desk. The late morning light was coming through his office window in a way that reminded me I had not been in that room since Rosalind was alive. Ebenezer, is that fair? Son, ask yourself what they did when your wife was dying. I thought about it for about 11 seconds. It's fair. Good. Drive home. Read nothing they send you. Take pictures of the drain field. Call me every Thursday at 11 a.m. Bring Torrin to the June meetings. And do not tell anyone, not even your daughters, what we are about to do. Not until June 3rd. I drove back to Roland's Point under a blue September sky. On the way home, I stopped at the boat landing and walked down to the dock. A loon was calling across the middle of the lake. Rosalind had taught me, one evening in 1989, to distinguish the 4 calls of a common loon: the tremolo, the wail, the yodel, and the hoot. The one across the water that afternoon was a wail. I walked back up to the camp. I did what Ebenezer had told me to do. I did nothing. Delia Crosby Worthington held an open house that Saturday. I saw the signs at the head of the gravel road. I saw the Range Rovers parked along the shore. I stayed on my porch and read a book about glacial geology that Rosalind had given me in 2019. I did not look up. A knowledge nugget worth saving. In a complex multi-party real estate dispute, the single most expensive mistake an adverse party can make is engaging too early. Title problems that surface during construction can often be cured by retroactive signature eminent domain, or balance of hardship equity doctrines. Title problems that surface at closing cannot be cured at all before the closing fails. Timing is the difference between a negotiation and a collapse. For the next 8 months, I did nothing. I watched. I documented. I read. I waited. Delia Crosby Worthington's open houses continued through the fall, through the winter, and through a long Maine spring. She ran them every Saturday from 10 until 2. She wore, without fail, a cream linen blazer, which, for the record, stopped being weather appropriate around Columbus Day, but which Delia wore anyway because it matched the brochure. Whitfield Crosby Worthington stayed in Boston most weeks. He came to Maine for photo shoots and quarterly LLC meetings. I stayed on my porch. I watched the 7 deposit count rise to 9 in October, to 12 in January, to 14 in March. Every buyer was named in a filing with the Franklin County Registry of Deeds, which I pulled monthly through a retired clerk who did due diligence work for Ebenezer on the side. I built a spreadsheet. I knew every buyer's name, every buyer's attorney, every buyer's lender, and every buyer's title insurance carrier by the first week of April. The 4 carriers, in order of exposure, were Kennebec Valley Title Insurance Company, which was insuring 7 of the 14 deals, and with whose general counsel Lindsay Furbush I had worked for 21 years. First Maine Title Guarantee, insuring 4, Granite State Title, insuring 2, and 1 Boston carrier, Old Colony Title Assurance, insuring a single deal for a Massachusetts buyer. I called none of them. Not yet. In December, Delia Crosby Worthington escalated for the first time in person. She drove up my gravel road on a Thursday morning in her cream Range Rover and knocked on my kitchen door in a navy parka over the cream blazer. She had with her a manila folder containing a proposed post hoc easement agreement and a cashier's check for $12,000. Mr. Rowland, it's time we cleaned up this paperwork. Mrs. Crosby Worthington, please come in. I poured her a cup of coffee. I did not drink mine. I let her talk. She explained, over 26 minutes, the Loon Cove Project's community benefits, the lakefront stewardship ethic she and Whitfield had brought to Franklin County, and the excellent neighbors her 14 buyers would be. She produced the folder. She laid the easement agreement on my kitchen table. She placed the cashier's check on top of it. $12,000 for a permanent vehicular access easement, a permanent subsurface wastewater easement, and a permanent shared water supply easement across land valued by even a conservative assessor's calculation at over $300,000. I looked at the check. I looked at the agreement. I looked at Delia. Mrs. Crosby Worthington, I will need to review this with my counsel. Of course, I hope you will be reasonable. We have deposits in escrow, Thatcher. 14 families are counting on closing in June. I understand. She smiled. She patted my forearm. She left the check and the agreement on my table and drove down my road in her Range Rover. I did not touch either document. I photographed them in place. I called Ebenezer on his direct line at 11:04 a.m. and read him the entire agreement. He listened. At the end he said, very slowly, "Thatcher, leave the check on the table. Do not sign. Do not reply. Do not cash. Photograph it daily for 30 days. If she sends a follow-up, do not answer. If she sends a second check, do not answer. If she files anything, forward it to me." We are building a documentary record of her aggressive post hoc pressure tactics. It will be gold in June. Yes, Ebenezer. One more thing, son. Yeah. Call Mary Louise Goodfellow this afternoon. I want her to see this too. Mary Louise Goodfellow was the current president of the Maine Real Estate Bar Association and a former colleague of mine. She returned my call within 20 minutes. She listened. When I finished, she said, in a voice flat as a level, "Thatcher, this is one of the cleanest closing day leverage situations I have seen in 24 years of practice. I want you to know that the association's Real Estate Ethics Committee is going to be very interested in Kennebec Heritage Development Partners' filing practices when this is over. But for now, hold." "I'm holding, Mary Louise." "Good. Also, what is Whitfield's LLC registered agent?" I told her. "Huh," she said. "That firm has had 3 sanctionable filings in Maine in the past 4 years. This will be their 4th. I drove out to the boat landing that afternoon. The lake was half frozen, in the gray transitional way Maine lakes freeze through November and December. A single loon was still on the water, refusing, as they sometimes do, to fly south. I stood there for a long time. I had, at that moment, every piece I needed. I had the 1906 title. I had the lack of signature evidence. I had the Franklin County Recorder's certification of the contemplated easement filings. I had the 4 title insurance carriers. I had Ebenezer. I had Mary Louise. I had Lindsay Furbush. I had time. And I had Rosalind's patience. Through the winter, Delia tried 3 more times. In January, she sent a certified letter through her attorney, demanding a signature on the easement agreement, threatening a lawsuit for intentional interference with lawful subdivision development. I forwarded it to Ebenezer. He forwarded it to Mary Louise. Mary Louise, in her office in Augusta, laughed once and said out loud to her paralegal, "This is a demand letter threatening a non-existent cause of action under a statute that does not apply." In February, she came in person a second time, this time with Whitfield. Whitfield wore a blazer over a flannel shirt, in what I took to be his effort to appear Maine. He offered me $25,000, more than double the original, as a gesture. I thanked them for coming. I told them my counsel would respond. I did not respond. In March, she escalated to the Franklin County Planning Board, asking them to impose a forced easement under Community Infrastructure Necessity Doctrine. The Planning Board, after consultation with their counsel, declined to act. The chair, a 70-year-old former lumberyard owner named Granville Hickman, returned Delia's call personally and informed her that the board had neither the authority nor the inclination to force private easements on non-consenting landowners in Maine. In April, the sales brochures for the Loon Cove Lakefront Estates closing season went to print. The deal dates were locked in. Escrow deposits totaled $4.2 million. In May, with 6 weeks until the first closing, Delia did something that told me she had not spoken with her attorney in some time. She hired a landscaping crew. She ordered them to cut down my great-grandfather's 12 remaining old-growth eastern white pines along the gravel road, to open up the lake view from every cabin deck. Torrin saw it first. He had driven up from Orono on a Saturday morning to spend a weekend at the camp. He called me from the landing at 7:47 a.m. "Uncle, there's a crew cutting the pines. They've already topped the first one." I drove down. The crew foreman was a 43-year-old from Farmington named Barney Ouellette, whose grandfather had done tree work for my grandfather. Barney recognized me. His face went through 3 colors in 6 seconds. "Mr. Rowland, she told me she had the landowner's permission." "Barney, did she give you written permission?" "No, sir. She told me it was... I'm sorry, sir. She told me it was a surprise gift to the property owner. I should have called." "Barney, stop the saws. Walk your men off. Leave the trees where they fell. Call Mrs. Crosby Worthington and tell her you have a question for her." He did. Delia arrived 47 minutes later in the cream Range Rover. She climbed out. She looked at me. She looked at the felled tree crowns. She said, "Mr. Rowland, I asked Barney to prepare the lake view for our closings. Perhaps we should discuss compensation." I took a photograph of the felled crowns. I took a photograph of the Range Rover. I took a photograph of Delia and Barney together. "Mrs. Crosby Worthington, Barney, please file a Maine Forest Practices Act report on this cutting. Delia, please have your attorney contact Ebenezer Pike. Do not engage directly with me again." She tried to argue. I walked back up the slope to my truck. Torrin, who had been filming with his phone from 40 yards away, followed me. On the way back to the camp, Torrin spoke for the first time since the landing. "Uncle, how many are left?" 3. Out of 152. Out of 164 planted in 1873. We lost a dozen over 152 years to weather. The rest were cut by people who thought they had permission. "Uncle, we're going to fix this, right?" I looked at my nephew, at his freshly broken voice, at the cap he had pulled down over his eyes, at his grandfather's profile emerging in his 19-year-old jawline. "Torrin, we're going to fix some of it. The trees we cannot get back, the rest we can." A knowledge nugget worth pinning. Maine Forest Practices Act violations carry both civil penalties and criminal liability. If somebody destroys trees on your land without written permission, file the Forest Practices complaint the same day, document with photographs and GPS coordinates, and require the contractor to sign a witness statement. The resulting penalty is not small, and the documentation is nearly unassailable. I called Ebenezer that afternoon. He listened. He said simply, "Thatcher, you are now 42 days from closing. The pine cutting has just given us another $500,000 of leverage. Save the photographs. Keep the documentation. Call me June 3rd. "Yes, Ebenezer." "And Thatcher." "Yeah. Rosalind would want you to plant new ones, whatever the settlement says. I know. The Tuesday after the pine cutting, 19 days before the first closing, I drove to Farmington to spend an afternoon in Ebenezer's office. Mary Louise Goodfellow had driven up from Augusta. Lindsay Furbush, general counsel of Kennebec Valley Title, had come up from Bangor at my request. We were not there to plan. We were there to rehearse the sequence. Ebenezer had a whiteboard. On it, in his slightly shaky 74-year-old handwriting, were the 4 pieces I was going to deliver simultaneously on the morning of June 3rd, 72 hours before the first closing. Piece 1. A formal, written notice to each of the 4 title insurance underwriters, Kennebec Valley, First Main, Granite State, and Old Colony, stating that I held clear title, free of any easement, in favor of Loon Cove or Kennebec Heritage Development Partners, LLC. Attached, every deed in the chain from 1906 forward, and the 2021 contemplated easement filings, annotated to show the absence of my signature. Piece 2. A formal complaint filed with the Maine Department of Environmental Protection's Subsurface Wastewater Program, reporting that 14 lakefront residences were imminently going to be occupied on a shared drain field sitting on an unsigned easement. Piece 3. A Maine Forest Practices Act complaint against Kennebec Heritage Development Partners, LLC, and Mrs. Delia Crosby Worthington personally for the illegal cutting of 12 protected mature white pines. Piece 4. And this was the one Mary Louise smiled at, a formal ethics complaint against the 2 attorneys who had filed the 2021 contemplated easements. One of those attorneys was, as Mary Louise had already noted in December, a lawyer with 3 prior sanctionable filings. The 4 pieces, delivered simultaneously on Monday, June 3rd, would reach Delia and Whitfield's desks by Tuesday afternoon. By Wednesday, the title underwriters would have killed every policy. By Thursday, Whitfield's closings would begin to cascade collapse. By Friday, with closing day scheduled for Saturday, he would have no option left except to negotiate with me. Mary Louise looked at the whiteboard. Thatcher, this is the cleanest closing day leverage sequence I have seen in Maine real estate since Booth Bay Marina 2009. You are going to get every one of the 4 things you asked for in September. Ebenezer took off his reading glasses. One thing, Mary Louise, I would like the ethics complaint to stay confidential until after settlement. Kennebec Heritage Development Partners has 14 buyers who are not at fault. I want those families in their cabins by Labor Day. I want Thatcher to get his easements, his money, and his conservation protection. But I want the buyers to close. Mary Louise nodded once. Your call. Held to page 4 then. File Monday morning, but label it confidential until settled. We broke at 3:45. I drove home under a May sky that still held the edge of March in it. That night on my porch, I sat with Torin. We ate leftover pot roast. The loons were back on the water. Uncle, is it ready? 19 days, son. Okay. The 19 days between that afternoon in Ebenezer's office and the morning of June 3rd were the quietest 19 days of my life, and perhaps also the busiest. I spent most of them on the dock with Torin, putting the camp back in order for summer. We rebuilt the boathouse ramp, which had buckled under March ice. We replaced the loose decking on the front steps of the camp. We repainted, at Torin's insistence, the 1906 sign at the head of the gravel road, in the same hand-lettered style his great-great-grandfather had used. Torin did the letters himself. His penmanship is better than mine. Ebenezer prepared the 4 filings with the precision of a man who had drafted closing documents for 4 decades. He used the same fountain pen for every signature line. He had Mary Louise review each filing twice. He had Lindsay Furbush run the title insurance notice through his own underwriting standards panel to ensure no procedural flaw would allow a carrier to argue technical insufficiency. Lindsay Furbush, in parallel, quietly notified her fellow general counsels at First Main, Granite State, and Old Colony that an informational notice was likely to arrive at their offices in the first week of June regarding the Loon Cove Lakefront Estates transactions. She did not give details. She did not have to. Professional courtesy in the Maine title insurance industry runs on signals as precise as loon calls. All 3 counterparts understood that something significant was coming and that they should be prepared to move quickly. I met, at Ebenezer's suggestion, with each of the 14 buyers' attorneys, one by one, in the first 2 weeks of May. I did not tell them what was coming. I told them, simply, that I was the adjoining landowner to Loon Cove, that I had not yet executed any easement agreement with the HOA, and that their due diligence review might benefit from a closer look at the easement chain. 12 of the 14 attorneys thanked me, pulled their files, and called me back within 72 hours, asking where the actual signed easements were. The 14th attorney, a 44-year-old named Penelope Atherton from a Boston firm, called me back within 90 minutes. She said, "Mr. Rowland, I have been asking Kennebec Heritage for the signed easement pages for 16 weeks. I have been told they are on their way. Are you telling me they do not exist?" Ms. Atherton, "I am telling you I have not signed them. I am telling you no easements exist in favor of Loon Cove across my property. I am not instructing you further. I will be in touch with your title underwriter on June 3rd. She was quiet for 6 seconds. Then she said, "Mr. Rowland, thank you. I am going to put my buyer's deposit into a double escrow lockup tomorrow morning." Good, counselor. Have a nice weekend. By the end of May, all 14 buyers' attorneys had quietly moved their deposits into heightened scrutiny escrow arrangements. Not one of them had told their clients the reason. The buyers themselves, families from Boston, Portland, Worcester, Concord, Manchester, and 4 from Boston suburbs, continued to plan moving dates, order furniture, schedule painters. Delia continued to run Saturday open houses in her cream blazer. Whitfield Crosby Worthington, in his Boston office, was, based on the records Mary Louise had pulled through her Massachusetts bar contacts, drawing down his personal line of credit to meet interim interest payments to Kennebec Heritage's construction lender. On the evening of Sunday, June 2nd, I sat on my porch with Torrin, Ebenezer, Mary Louise, Lindsay Furbush, and my old friend Silas Berube, a 79-year-old retired Maine guide who had known my father since 1948. My daughter Clementine had driven up from Bangor with 4-year-old Ames. My younger daughter Meredith had driven up from Lewiston with a casserole. We ate red snappers off the grill. We drank my father's last 2 bottles of 1998 Glenlivet. Silas Berube told a story about my father running a canoe over Kennebec Falls in 1961. At 11:15, after Ames had been put to bed in the loft, and the others had drifted off to their guest beds, I walked out to the dock alone. The lake was still. The loons were calling. 2, 3, sometimes 4 of them, in the same 4-note vocabulary Rosalind had taught me in 1989. I told her out loud that tomorrow morning was the morning. A knowledge nugget worth pinning. The best closing day leverage is not loud. It is precise. It is built over months by people you trust. It arrives in the form of 4 pieces of paper, filed before breakfast, on a Monday morning that the other side did not see coming. When you have done the work, you do not need to raise your voice. The record will speak at exactly the right frequency. At 6:45 on Monday morning, June 3rd, Ebenezer Pike walked into the Franklin County Superior Court filing window with the 4 envelopes in his briefcase. I walked into the Rangeley post office at the same hour with the 4 certified mailings to the title insurance underwriters. Ebenezer's clerk time-stamped the filings at 6:53. The certified mailings cleared the Rangeley post office at 6:58. The sun was just clearing the ridge across Kennebec Lake. By Tuesday afternoon, Delia Crosby Worthington had received all 4 envelopes. I know because Henriette, a checkout clerk at the Rangeley IGA, saw Delia in the parking lot at 3:17 p.m. that afternoon, shouting into her phone, in a tone she had never heard from another human being. "Whitfield, you need to call Hardaway right now." Henriette texted Clementine. Clementine texted me. I forwarded the text to Ebenezer. Ebenezer wrote back, "Good. The sequence has begun." By Wednesday, June 5th at 11 a.m., Lindsay Furbush at Kennebec Valley Title formally declined to issue title policies on the 7 Loon Cove transactions Kennebec Valley was insuring. Her written decline was 3 paragraphs long and cited the absence of recorded or unrecorded valid easements across the Rowland parcel. The other 3 carriers, First Main, Granite State, and Old Colony, issued parallel declines within 9 hours. By Wednesday evening, every single one of the 14 Loon Cove transactions had its title policy refused. Without title policies, the buyer's lenders, 5 different banks, including the Portsmouth Regional Bank that was holding Kennebec Heritage's construction debt, could not release mortgage funds. Without mortgage funds, the closings could not be completed. The Saturday closing date, scheduled for the first 3 cabins, was already mathematically impossible by Wednesday night. On Thursday morning, Penelope Atherton in Boston contacted her buyer's lender, and filed a formal deposit return request. By noon, 3 of the other buyers' attorneys had done the same. By Friday morning, all 14 buyers had filed deposit return requests. $4.2 million in escrow was, by lunchtime Friday, sitting in a return queue. The Portsmouth lender, once they heard, called an emergency executive meeting. By 3 p.m. Friday, Kennebec Heritage Development Partners' construction loan was reclassified from performing to non-performing and placed on a 7-day default watch. Whitfield's personal line of credit was frozen. His commercial business real estate in Boston, held as collateral, was pre-flagged for potential foreclosure. By 5 p.m. Friday, Delia Crosby Worthington had called my camp landline. I did not answer. By 6 p.m., Whitfield had called. I did not answer. By 7:30, Whitfield's Boston law firm, Hardaway, Strong, and Mercer, the same firm that had drafted the 2021 contemplated easement filings, 2 of whose partners were now facing the ethics complaint Ebenezer had filed confidentially on Monday morning, called Ebenezer directly. Ebenezer took the call. He listened for 41 minutes. He made 3 procedural corrections to the Boston partners' understanding of Maine real estate law. At the end, he said, "Counselor, my client is available to discuss settlement parameters Monday morning, 9 a.m., at my office in Farmington. Please bring your principal." The Boston partner asked if Saturday was possible. Ebenezer said, "Saturday is my day to fly fish the Sandy River. Monday at 9. Monday at 9, Whitfield Crosby Worthington, his attorney Barnaby Hardaway, Delia Crosby Worthington, and a Portsmouth bank representative named Imogen Vrooman all arrived at Ebenezer's office in Farmington. Mary Louise Goodfellow was there. Lindsay Furbush was there. I was there with Torrin. Whitfield looked like a man who had slept 4 hours in 3 days. Ebenezer opened the meeting with a single sentence. "Mr. Hardaway, my client is prepared to sign recorded permanent easement agreements covering vehicular access, shared subsurface wastewater disposal, and shared water supply, in exchange for 4 items. 1. Fair market compensation at $1.1 million, to be paid in full in escrow by Friday. 2. A permanent conservation easement on the remainder of Rowlands Point, filed with the Maine Land Trust Network. 3. Public written acknowledgement of the 2021 filing error by Kennebec Heritage Development Partners, to be included in each buyer's closing binder. 4. Replacement of all 12 illegally cut white pines with mature specimens purchased from the Bangor Nursery at Kennebec Heritage's sole expense, to be planted under my client's supervision." Barnaby Hardaway opened his mouth to object. Whitfield put his hand on Barnaby's arm. "Done," Whitfield said. The meeting adjourned at 9:26. Between the Monday settlement conference and the eventual reopening of the Loon Cove closings, 7 days passed. Those 7 days contained more paperwork than my previous year combined. Ebenezer, Mary Louise, Lindsay, and I worked 11-hour days. The easement drafting was the cleanest part. 3 permanent recorded easements, each with specific mechanical dimensions, access limitations, maintenance allocations, and restoration requirements. Each signed on the Thursday, notarized by Ebenezer's paralegal, recorded at the Franklin County Registry of Deeds the same afternoon. The conservation easement on the remainder of Rowlands Point took longer. The Maine Land Trust Network sent a field representative out to walk the 326 acres I was placing under permanent protection. The easement language ran 41 pages. It prohibited residential subdivision, commercial logging, and any alteration of the lakefront corridor for 200 feet from the mean high water line. It permitted agricultural uses, my own occupancy for life, continuation of the existing family camp, and forest management for ecological health. Torrin signed it as a designated future steward at the age of 19, on behalf of the 3rd generation of the Rowland family to occupy the point. The compensation payment of $1.1 million cleared escrow by close of business Friday. Kennebec Valley Title, under Lindsay Furbush's personal oversight, handled the escrow. Whitfield wired the funds from his commercial bank accounts. Imogen Vrooman, at the Portsmouth lender, released the hold on Kennebec Heritage's construction loan the same afternoon, upon confirmation of the recorded easements and the escrow settlement. By the following Monday morning, all 4 title insurance carriers had reissued closing policies on the 14 Loon Cove transactions. The cascaded closing schedule that had been scheduled for June 15th through July 10th was rebuilt, compressed, for July 1st through July 20th. The 14 buyers were notified by their attorneys that closings would proceed. Delia Crosby Worthington, over those 7 days, did not appear publicly. She also did not attend a single one of the eventual closings. I am told, by Clementine's friend Henriette at the IGA, that Delia had in fact retreated to her and Whitfield's Boston apartment for the duration. She was, according to Henriette's second-hand report from a Loon Cove landscaper, furious with Whitfield for mismanaging the easement question. Whitfield, for his part, behaved with a kind of bleak professionalism. He showed up at Ebenezer's office Thursday morning with all 12 required replacement white pines already contracted under a purchase order from Bangor Nursery for delivery and planting in the fall. He wrote me, through his attorney, a 3-page letter of formal acknowledgement that his LLC had proceeded on faulty assumptions and that my property rights had not been properly obtained. I accepted the letter. I did not reply. I filed it. Over the same week, the Maine Forest Practices Act complaint proceeded on its own schedule. The Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry issued a formal citation to Kennebec Heritage Development Partners, LLC, and, separately, to Mrs. Delia Crosby Worthington personally, for the unauthorized cutting of 12 mature eastern white pines. The civil penalty was assessed at $11,000 per tree, totaling $132,000, payable within 60 days. Kennebec Heritage paid the penalty from the settlement funds. The Maine Real Estate Bar Association's Real Estate Ethics Committee opened its investigation into the 2 Hardaway, Strong, and Mercer attorneys who had filed the 2021 contemplated easements. That investigation remains ongoing, though Mary Louise has informed me that formal discipline, likely suspension rather than disbarment, is the expected outcome. On Friday of the settlement week, I walked the length of the gravel road with Torrin, Ebenezer, and Silas Berube. We measured, with surveyor's stakes, the locations where each of the 12 new eastern white pines would be planted in October. Silas Berube did the placement for 9 of the 12 stakes from memory, because he had walked that road with my father in 1953. Torrin did 3 from his forest ecology training at Orono. At the last stake, where the final pine was to go, Silas Berube stopped and said, "Thatcher." "Yes, Silas. Your father told me in 1978 that this was the tree you climbed to get over the fight with your mother the summer you were 11. I remember. It took them almost 50 years to cut it down. It's going to take us about 30 to grow a new one tall enough." "That's about right, Silas. I'll be dead then." "I know. I'll see it anyway." I did not answer that one. I did not need to. Now I had a choice to make that Ebenezer, Mary Louise, Lindsay, and Silas had all deferred to me. What to do publicly? The 14 buyers had purchased in good faith. Not one of them had known about the easement defects. Their closings were proceeding, cleanly, from July 1st through July 20th. The Portsmouth lender was whole. The title carriers were whole. The state of Maine was whole. Delia and Whitfield Crosby Worthington, the 2 people who had orchestrated the 5-year exploitation of a dying woman's husband, were, financially, not whole. Whitfield had paid $1.1 million in easement compensation, $132,000 in forestry penalties, and approximately $700,000 in delayed closing costs and interest charges. His LLC was technically solvent, but his Boston business holdings were in the process of being restructured. He and Delia had sold a Beacon Hill townhouse by the end of July. The ethics complaint against their attorneys was still under investigation. I could have, at any moment, called a press conference. The Rangeley Lakes Messenger reporter Poppy Brogan had reached out to me through Ebenezer 4 separate times. So had the Portland Press Herald. So had Maine Public Radio. Each of them had received, through my attorney, a polite decline. Instead, I called a private meeting. On a Saturday afternoon in late July, 2 days after the 10th Loon Cove closing had completed, I invited the 14 buyers, with their families if they wished, to a reception at Rowlands Point. 12 of the 14 came. 2 could not. They were scheduled to be on vacation. Henriette from the IGA catered. Silas Berube brought 180 wild blueberries from his own bush, washed and dumped into a blue ceramic bowl on the picnic table. Torrin set up a folding table near the shore with a small display of photographs. The 1906 sign, my great-grandfather Isaiah in 1923, my father on Kennebec Lake in 1952, my wife Rosalind on the dock in 2017, the 152-year-old white pine before it was cut, and the cleared stumps after. The 12 families walked the property. They met Torrin, Clementine, Meredith, Ames, and Silas Berube. They stood on the dock where my great-grandfather used to land his canoes. They looked at the stumps. They looked at the 1906 sign Torrin had repainted in May. At 4 o'clock, I called them together on the front lawn. I told them in plain language the story of what had happened. I did not mention Delia or Whitfield by name, but the 12 families, attorneys and doctors and college professors and a retired Navy captain among them, had already guessed the contours. I told them that the easement defects had been resolved, that their cabins were theirs in full legal certainty, and that I welcomed them as neighbors. Then I told them what I was doing with the $1.1 million of easement compensation. $180,000 went directly into the restoration, the replanting of the 12 white pines, the repair of the landing, the reconstruction of Isaiah's stone cairn at the property line. $700,000 was being placed into an endowed trust, the Rosalind Rowland Kennebec Heritage Trust. Its purpose is to purchase and conservation protect lakefront private parcels in Franklin County, whose owners face development pressure. Clementine would serve as trustee. Ebenezer would serve as counsel. $220,000 was going into a second fund named for my wife and my brother, the Wendell Rowland Youth Forestry Scholarship. 4 scholarships each year for rural Franklin County students pursuing forest ecology or wildland fire management at the University of Maine, Orono. Torrin would help select the annual recipients. The 12 buyers stood quietly. The retired Navy captain, a 67-year-old man named Gideon Price, took off his cap and set it on his chest. Then Penelope Atherton's buyer, a 51-year-old molecular biologist from Cambridge named Lucia Mendez, raised her hand. "Mr. Rowland, what can we do?" I thought about it. I looked at Torrin. I looked at Rosalind's photograph on the table. "Ms. Mendez, come back next year. Bring your children. Let Torrin walk you around the new pines. Tell your buyer's attorneys, when they are working on your next deal, to pull the easement chain themselves. That's all I ask." There was a quiet for about 9 seconds. Then Gideon Price, the retired captain, said, "Mr. Rowland, I'm going to ask the 14 of us, tomorrow, to formally dissolve and reconstitute our homeowners association under new bylaws and a new president. And I'm going to ask the new board to extend you an honorary non-voting advisory role. I can't promise you'll say yes, but I want to promise you'll be asked." I looked at Gideon Price, at his square, retired Navy shoulders, at his cap on his chest. "Captain, thank you. I'll accept." The gathering broke up at dusk. I stood on my porch and watched the last Range Rover drive down the gravel road, past the 12 newly staked planting sites, past the 1906 sign, out into the Maine evening. By Labor Day of that year, all 14 Loon Cove closings had completed. The reconstituted Loon Cove Community Association, with Gideon Price as its new president, was in active operation. Delia Crosby Worthington had moved back to Boston permanently. Whitfield Crosby Worthington's Delaware LLC, Kennebec Heritage Development Partners, had been dissolved at the end of the year. The Maine Real Estate Bar Association's Ethics Committee had issued a 6-month suspension to the senior Hardaway, Strong and Mercer partner responsible for the 2021 contemplated easement filings. The 12 replacement white pines were planted on the gravel road on the second Saturday of October. Silas Berube, at 79, attended with a shovel and a hip flask. Torrin had flown home from Orono for the weekend. Gideon Price, the retired Navy captain, came from his cabin with 3 of his adult grandchildren. Penelope Atherton's buyer, Lucia Mendez, came with her 2 teenage daughters. Together, we planted 12 6-foot mature eastern white pine saplings, each grown from seed stock harvested from the Acadia Forest Research Station. Silas Berube said a few words at the first planting. He spoke about my father. He spoke about my great-grandfather. He spoke about Rosalind. Then he put a spade of earth around the first trunk and said, in the quietest voice he uses when he is about to cry, "They'll grow. They will." The Rosalind Rowland Kennebec Heritage Trust purchased its first conservation easement in November, 39 acres of lakefront woodland on the northwestern shore of Kennebec Lake, owned by a retired dairy farmer named Annabelle Couture. Annabelle signed the easement at her kitchen table, with Clementine as witness. The land will never be subdivided. The Wendell Rowland Youth Forestry Scholarship awarded its first 4 scholarships in February. One of the 4 recipients, a 17-year-old boy named Marshall St. Laurent, whose father works as a wildland firefighter for the Maine Forest Service, cried when he received his letter. Torrin took him to lunch in Orono 2 weeks later. My grandson, Ames, who turned 5 in March, now walks the gravel road with me every summer Saturday. He greets each of the 12 new saplings by a name he has invented. The tallest one, which I did not plant myself, but which Torrin planted on my behalf, Ames has named Nana after my late wife. My daughters both come north for 4 weeks each summer now. Clementine and Meredith share the camp bedroom on the upper floor. Their mother's room, on the lakeside, stays empty and keeps her watercolors on the wall. Torrin is, as of this past May, in the spring term of his senior year at the University of Maine, Orono. He has accepted a graduate assistantship in silviculture at the University of New Hampshire for next fall. He has told me, over coffee on my porch, that his long-term intention is to come back to Roland's Point and help his Uncle Thatcher manage the conservation forest. I have told him that is exactly what the Rosalind Roland Trust was built for. Delia Crosby Worthington, I am told, runs a luxury property staging business in the Back Bay. Whitfield, I am told, consults for Boston real estate investors on a reduced schedule. I do not see them, and I do not wish them any harm, and I also do not wish to see them. Maine has room enough for that kind of grace. On the first anniversary of my wife's death, I walked to the dock at dusk with my daughters, my grandson, my nephew, and my old friend Silas Berube. The loons were on the water. Ames asked whether we could sing a song. Clementine suggested the one her mother had taught her at his age, a simple Maine camp song about a red canoe and a blue canoe. We sang it, off-key, in the last light. If this story has a lesson, it is that the quietest leverage is the leverage that waits. If your family has been sitting on a right that somebody has been quietly stealing from you, do not shout. Document. Prepare. Choose your Monday morning. Drop your own HOA story in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe for next week, where a coastal HOA decides a widow's family oyster lease belongs to the community, and learns what eelgrass law looks like in the First Circuit Court of Appeals. I'll see you there.
What made Delia Crosby Worthington lose wasn't Thatcher Rowland's closing day filing. It was her and her husband's decision. 5 years earlier, to file a contemplate easement at the county territory, while a woman down the lake was beginning to lose the use of her left hand to AOS. She mistook a caregiver read for consent. She mistook paperwork her husband has invented for paperwork her neighbor has signed. She never asked before she cut down 1,250-year-old pine, who has been watching every one of her moves. Thatcher's real advantage wasn't his 29 years of due diligence. It was his refusal to react when reacting would have cost him the leverage. He sat on his post for 8 months, let 14 deposits move into escrow, let Delia run Saturday open houses in her cream blazer. He waited for Monday morning, June 3rd, and filed 4 pieces of paper before breakfast. 72 hours later, the closing was gone. If you are sitting on the right, somebody has been quietly stealing. Do not shout. Document. Prepare. Choose your Monday. Drop your own HOA story in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe for next week, where coastal HOA decides a widow's orator lease belongs to the community, and learns what eelgrass law looks like in federal court. See you there.